Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and today I'll show you the easy way to turn traditional shaker, drawer, and door pulls. I find that many folks who make their own furniture may have a lathe of some sort, and they do a little turning, but they aren't skilled turners. So when it comes time to put pulls on their cabinets or their chests of drawers that they built, they go out and they buy them. And that's fine, especially if you want a metal pull. But if you want a more traditional look, a shaker-style wooden knob may be a better option. And if you can turn it yourself from scraps left over from the project you just built, you're sure to get a perfect grain and color match. Not to mention you're going to save a few bucks. Shaker pulls came in many shapes and sizes. Handberg's shop drawings of shaker furniture has some full-size drawings if you want to go for true authenticity. But since the basic shape is a mushroom, you can just experiment until you find a profile you like. You'll also notice that shaker pulls feature a distinctive tenon on the end. We'll talk more about that later. For now, let's turn one. Some folks are a pleasure to work with, like Ken Rizzo over at woodturnerswonders.com. That's where I get my turning stuff, like sanding supplies and CBN wheels for my grinder. Seriously, if you haven't seen what CBN wheels can do for you, you are missing out. I'll put a link below this video. Use it and tell Ken I sent you. I like to cut grooves into the end grain of my workpiece for the spur drive to bite into. Some folks just pound the drive into the end, but I just think this is a better method and produces a better fit. The pulls I'm making are about 1 1/8 inches in diameter, so I turn my blank down to roughly that size with a spindle roughing gouge. We'll be using steel tools throughout this project, but you can use carbide tools if you prefer. The process will be essentially the same if the technique is a bit different. I'm using one of the drawings in the book as a pattern. The dome is about 3/8 of an inch thick. The coved neck is about 7/8 of an inch, and the tenon is another 7/8 of an inch. I laid 4 sets of these marks out on a story stick, which I then used to mark my blank. The first step is to use a parting tool and some calipers to size the tenons to 1/2 inch. It's important to be accurate here, because I want to use a standard drill bit to bore mounting holes in my project for these tenons to go into later. I chose 1/2 inch because that's the largest size that'll fit inside my Jacob's chuck. More on that later too. I find it easier to make a straight tenon if I part down with a caliper on each end, then remove the waste in between. You can even part down in the center 1 or 2 times. You don't want a tapered or lumpy tenon. You have to be straight and accurate with this. Next, I want to part down the lower shoulder above the tenon to just a bit larger than the tenon itself. Now I have to remove the waste from that point up to the bottom of the dome, creating an asymmetrical curve. I'm using a 3/8 inch gouge for this. Be careful to only cut downhill away from where the dome will be. If you try to cut uphill, your gouge may catch and pull towards the dome, removing wood where you do not want it removed. Uphill cuts are also against the grain, which will leave a rougher surface. Note that at the deepest part of the cove, the diameter is smaller than the tenon itself. We're not just making a sweeping curve here, we're actually forming a valley. And the last bit of the shoulder near the tenon is flat. Of course, this is how the shakers made this particular pull. You're free to modify your profile to suit your own tastes. Time to shape the domes. If you're a skilled turner, you may use a skew for this. But I find that many casual turners shy away from skews because they're afraid of getting a catch. With practice, you'll gain confidence and you'll find that the skew is one of your most versatile tools. But I promise to show you the easy way to make a pull. So I'm going to begin shaping my domes with a gouge. If you haven't already noticed, let me point out that I repeated each step of this process on each pull, cutting 4 tenons, then 4 coves, and so on. I find that cutting several pulls on each blank and repeating each step like this helps me to match the profiles from one pull to another. Once you've cut 100 or so of these, you'll be able to make them one at a time with confidence. But for now, this technique just helps ensure everything matches a little bit better. I can only cut so much of the domes without thinning out my blank too much, which may cause it to break off on me. So I do what I can, then I remove the blank and I cut each pull free. To finish the dome, I'll use a Jacob's chuck. If you don't have one of these for your lathe, get one. They're extremely useful and not very expensive. I'll put a link to the one that I use in the notes below this video. As long as your tenon is straight, it shouldn't take too much pressure to hold it in place. Don't over tighten the chuck, you're going to deform the tenon. Now I'm going to use a scraper to finish the dome. Again, a skew would have been a better tool for this because of its clean slicing action, but an unskilled turner can easily catch the sharp edge of the dome as it forms with the skew, or even with a gouge, and the whole thing could just split and explode on you. So a beginning turner might just want to stick with the scraper until you get a little more practice with the skew. A little bit of sanding can smooth out any rough parts left behind, but if you're good, you can just burnish the surface with a handful of shavings. Then add some finish. Now let's talk about that tenon. If you've bought wood poles in a store, you know that they don't have tenons on them. They have screws to hold them in place, but traditional shaker knobs didn't require fasteners. The tenon came in 3 variants. Some were straight like ours, which were merely glued into holes in the drawer or door fronts. Others were tapered, and the benefit of the tapered tenon is you can match it to the spur drive on your lathe. Then you don't need a Jacob's chuck. You can just insert the tenon right into the headstock and let friction hold it in place. Of course, then you would have to create a tapered hole in your project to glue the pole into, and that requires a different tool you likely don't have. Whether straight or tapered, smooth tenons presented a problem though. Over time, through natural wood movement, the glue holding the pole in place may weaken. So some poles were made with threaded tenons that you could just screw into a tapped hole. But I'm betting you don't have a thread box and tap either. If you're worried about the glue failing, you may just try a hybrid approach. Trim the tenon so it won't go all the way through the door or drawer front. Then bore a hole only as deep as it has to be. Counterbore the pilot hole from the other side into the end of the tenon, and then use a coarse threaded screw to secure the pole in place. Shaker poles are fun to make. They look great on any project, and they'll help you keep your turning skills sharp, so give it a try sometime. Wait, don't go yet. If you're new here, please subscribe, and remember to ring the bell. I would really appreciate that. Give us a thumbs up, or better yet, leave us a comment. I always read them. And be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. It's always packed with tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker.